audio and video for the presenters. Just make sure that they can hear us. If somebody remote, could you confirm that you can hear the meeting? Just say something in chat.
We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Yeah, just once again for the remote people, this is the Walter Popov just introduced himself, Director for Area H. I'm Yav Maloff. I'm the CFO for the RDCK, and we're here to discuss the budget for the regional district, specifically as it affects the Village of Slocan and Area H South. We did New Denver and Silverton and Area H North last Wednesday, so doing South today.
Yeah, so we have corrected me. A lot goes into the budget. Yeah, was the guy that puts it all together.
Okay, yeah. All right, so we'll start here. Okay, so agenda, we'll do a bit of a high-level overview of the regional district and the services that we provide. Talk a bit about property assessments and their budget impact. 2025 overall outlook. We'll go through several services, discuss their budgets and what service they provide. And at the end, we'll have a couple of pie charts regarding that show the estimated taxation for Slocan and Area H. This is a bit of a preamble. This is a draft budget. This is actually the third version of the draft budget. We had one come out, first one about 2.5 weeks ago. This is the latest version. It was compiled on February 25th. So we're still going through changes. There's year-end adjustments from last year that could affect the current plan. Staff committee, commission director, and board level reviews are continuing. Of course, this public information session's in progress. And again, this budget's based, presentation is based on the February 25th version. So the budget review process, the board as a whole had a budget review meeting on February 21st, where the board discussed numerous services. And starting last fall and even going through up till this March, there's numerous committee and commission meetings through Parks, Rec, Resource Recovery, which is basically waste services and transit. And as well, there's a couple local service committees and as well staff and director discussions. So this all comes to head, I guess, on March 20th at the open regular board meeting, where the final draft presented to the board. The board does their final review, recommends any changes, and then the budget would be passed that day for submission to the provincial ministry by March 31st. So we're about a few weeks away from that. Overview of the regional districts. So one of the 27 regional districts in BC. There's 11 rural electoral areas, A through K. H is the one right in the middle there, going from the junction all the way up to, I guess, about Summit Lake. So 10 member municipalities in the regional district, and providing the regional district provides 186 services, including Parks and Rec, rural fire protection, emergency management, resource recovery and waste, building inspection, planning, GIS bylaw, transit. That last comment, each service stands on its own, is basically each service has its own budget, its own funding, its own reserves. And so the difference between a regional district and a municipality is regional districts have to keep the accounting for each service separate. We can't move reserves from one service to the other or surpluses or deficits. Municipality could have one big reserve and they could allocate it basically where they want. So it's different with the regional districts. Few statistics: 298 full-time employees, equivalent employees, 280 volunteer firefighters, 62,500 residents and 22,000 square kilometers. BC provincial regulations impacting the regional district. This isn't the complete list, but this outlines the bulk of them. The two main ones, if anybody's really interested in seeing what regulations guide the regional district, is the Local Government Act and the Community Charter. That basically dictates finances, the service model, how referendums are run, how elections are run. So two hefty documents there. So how are property taxes for the regional district calculated? So on the left-hand side, so for each service, a budget is determined, and then the tax requisition amount to fund that service comes through the budget process. And then completely separate from that, BC assessment assesses the properties and determines those values. So the regional district's not involved in that process or any disputes with that process. And then you take the tax requisition amount for each service, multiply it by the property assessment, and you get a tax rate per thousand for each service, and then times the assessed value for each individual property, and you'll get the property tax for each individual property for each service. So here's where, and I'll show a table later. The other difference is each service in the regional district will come up with its own tax rate, versus the municipality will have one general tax rate for the whole municipality. So this, it's a little bit slow. So this graph here basically shows the change in annual assessment year over year. Are the blue graphs, or the blue bars. So from 24 to 25, the range of increases were from -6% almost up to 11%. So a range of about 17%. So Area K had the highest increase. H was the second highest increase in property valuations, and Slocan was the lowest. So that's year over year. The orange is the 9-year average. So as you can see, over 9 years, there's only about a 4% difference. So over a longer term, you have a general reversion anyway in this period to a bit of a mean. So, but if you look year over year, you'll have wider swings. I should say, if anybody's got any questions through this presentation, just please raise your hand, or people online. Yes, question.
It's going to be online?
Yes, this presentation will be online tomorrow on the web page for this meeting. So if you go to the RDCK website and click on March 3rd on the calendar, this meeting will come up. Click on there and it'll be on the top. It'll be available tomorrow early afternoon on that site. Thank you for that question. Okay, the other thing that's online is the latest draft of the financial plan. So it's about a 300-page document, fairly detailed. It's divided. I'm not expecting you to read these figures on here, but it's divided basically into 3 areas. On the left-hand side is the taxation details by area. So I'll show you a copy of that. And then the upper right-hand side is the summary, which shows the change in assessment and taxation changes per area. And then behind that's about the 200 or so detailed service statements. So for every service, it lists out the budget for the 5 years, last year's actuals, last year's budget, as well as the amounts for every account that we track for that service. So there's lots to know for each service there. If you were really interested in even knowing more for some of these services, especially the larger ones, will have a public committee or commission meetings. Those are also available by Zoom or in person, and there's often, quite a bit of detailed discussion about each service at those levels. Okay, so this is that first section I talked about in the financial plan. Don't expect you to, again, read all these numbers, but I can just do a high-level outline. So this is for area H. So on the left-hand side is listed all these services that H participates in or served by. So the upper part of this table are the services that everybody in H pays into. So general admin, rural admin, GIS building, waste, and some transit services. And the bottom, what you'll notice here is the assessment amounts are different. So these are services that only portions of or certain defined areas of H participate in. So not everybody in H gets the street lighting, only some residents in South Slocan. And then same with fire, there's two different fire services. And not everybody in H is covered by S-142, which is the fire service Slocan and stuff.
And
Yes.
what about the recreational commission? We don't pay for it in Denver, do we?
No. So there's a separate service. I'm not going to show you Denver, but they have a separate service. But then there's also some combined services. So there's two rec commission services here. And I believe, and then there's a park service, S203 up there. So I think there's three separate rec services, and then I think Denver has another one on their own.
Do you want me to jump in?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, like, we have a recreation service called Recreation Number 8, which is for the southern portion of the valley. And everything. We still have, and it's still operating. Anyways, it starts south of village of Slocan and goes all the way into the village of South Slocan. And in the north, and the people that pay tax into it are Area H residents only. And the northern portion is Silverton, New Denver, and Area H north of Slocan that pays into that service.
Yeah. Is anybody here from the village of Slocan? Okay. So I'll assume maybe there's somebody online, but I'll go over this quickly. So the village of Slocan gets taxed for a portion of regional district services as well. Some of these are shared with Area H. For instance, and I'll go through it later. S18, which is refuse, some transit services, and then some of those top administrative services. So if you're a resident of the village of Slocan, you get a tax bill, which will show a line for a regional district, and then it'll show as well lines for the various services the village provides for its residents. So this is just the portion of the tax bill relating to regional district services provided to residents of Slocan. One of the larger shared services is actually Slocan Valley Fire, S-142. So there's a hall in Slocan that serves both the residents of Slocan as well as the surrounding rural area H. So here's an example of a tax bill. So it takes a second for it to catch up. Oh, here we are. So here's an example of a rural tax bill. I believe this one's for Beasley. But anyway, it'll show a few lines. The one big line on there is going to be for all the services that everybody in your area pays into. And then if you live at an address that gets, say, fire service, or then there'll be another line on your tax bill for each of those services that are only for specific addresses. And then, as you can see, your tax bill is made up more than just regional district services. It includes school, some provincial services, the hospital tax, and a few small assessment services. Question.
I keep saying I see, even though you can see, but maybe I'm getting old.
Yeah, focus. It's out of focus, I can't see.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, we don't have the capability to,
You can't zoom in on it?
I can't.
I'll move it closer. I'll put it
No, there is that projector up there. If you want to move closer,
It's not,
there's room to the,
it's not that, it's just
Yeah.
blurry, it's out of focus.
okay.
No.
Yeah, anybody else can't see, please feel free to move closer. We gotta,
It's not very. It's nice to listen to you, but I can't read anything.
yeah, no, please come forward.
Don't be shy.
It's a bit better.
Okay.
So you can't zoom your own screen into it? Make it larger?
No, it's, that's the way the projector is.
No, but your screen on your computer.
I can't do anything about
Oh,
my
okay.
my screen, it's while the presentation's going. I see what you're saying, no, because then you're only gonna see small little bits and pieces of it. So I don't know, hopefully this one's a little more readable, some larger text. Okay, so this is that summary out of the financial plan package. And so all the electoral areas and all the municipalities are listed on the left-hand side. And then the first two columns is the change in assessments from 24 through 25. So as you can see, area H, which we saw in that graph, has the second highest increase in assessments year over year, so almost 8.5%. Only area K had a larger increase, and Village of Slocan actually had a decrease in assessments. And then it shows the change in taxation, the next two columns, total dollars taxation, 24 through 25, as well as then on the far right hand side, the percentage increase in taxation. So area H, 8.9% for the average homeowner. Village of Slocan actually had a minus 2% increase in taxation for a regional district. So what drives some of this is what happens is this difference in assessment, changes in assessment. The higher increase that your home or your area had in assessment values means it's going to take a greater share of taxation than areas that had a smaller increase for those services that you share. So any of the general admin, rural admin, GIS, bylaw, and building, area H now would have taken, because its assessment values increased more, on average would take a greater share of increases. So some of that is driving that 9% increase in taxation this year, as compared to Slocan had the decrease in assessment, so they are actually having a decrease in taxes this year.
So is that the percentage that's gonna get added onto everybody's property?
On the far right hand side, property taxes.
Is that over and above the provincial taxation rate?
That's for the regional district portion of tax.
So if the province tax says your increase is 20%,
Yeah.
RDCK gets 8.9.
No, that's not how it works. So the government, the province said your tax went up the value of property went up 8%. So that 8% does not drive taxation. What your tax from last year to this year will increase by 8.9. So it's not on top of anything. That's 9% your increase in regional district taxes from last year to this year. But the change in assessment is partially help drive that increase higher than other areas.
And why was that?
Why did the area H increase more than the others?
yeah.
That's just because a large part. Okay, that's a great question, and a large part of that is driven by what they call a market change. So that's just, it's driven by people coming in the area and demand for homes and real estate prices going up. So BC Assessment has this very complicated model, and they do all kinds of sampling. They get all the real estate data, and then they use that. They compare it to what prices sold for the previous year, and then they adjust the value of your assessment. And then what the other part that does come into play though is if you get new home and new building construction, that actually helps because now you have new homes that could take some of the taxation burden. So area H had probably on the just a bit below average. So areas in Creston who had probably double the amount of new builds saw a lower increase in taxation. So sometimes growth helps your tax bill that way, as long as it offsets your any increased demand on services. Any other questions on this one here? Yes.
I'm just curious on recreation. You, Walter mentioned it a minute ago. I would ask if there is a breakdown of money spent on recreation in each area of Area D. Does that exist?
Actually, if I can take a stab at answering that. Sure. In Area H, the only breakdown is the northern portion and the southern portion, but not by community.
Okay. How does one go about finding out how much money was spent in the south and how much was spent in the north?
That would be in the
That value, all.
yeah. That would be in the detailed.
The devil is always in the details. That's
Yeah.
what I'm asking. Where is the actual numbers spent on recreation?
Okay.
And Yev is looking at it, probably might dig it out.
Yeah. So here's the summary. So we've got two, I guess, depending. So that's the one. I guess 229 must be the one on the north. And so Slocan, so 231, and Slocan H. So the budget for this year is $220,000 for 231.
Is that in the north?
In total.
No, that's 231 is I believe that's the one for the south.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
How much is it?
$221,000.
And does that include somebody's wages or is that money spent on recreation?
Yeah, where's the
That-
breakdown?
yeah,
Yes.
I've seen recreation vanish in the valley. That's my observation. I've lived here for 35 years, so I'm kind of a newcomer. But I started out in 1947 in Silverton, so I think that gives me a little tiny bit of room.
So we do have a recreation office here right next door in this hall. And we had problems getting somebody, a rec coordinator, because it is not a full-time job, it's a part-time job.
There's been a whole series of them.
That, you are correct in that, and there's not much we can do. We hire somebody, we look at the qualifications, they qualify for the job, we hire them, they stay here for a while and they find out that working part-time, they're not making enough income, so they leave. Then we advertise again, we bring somebody else in, and actually there's been a big shift since Craig Lawrence left. And when he left, that created a vacuum here, so we had a coordinator here, which was a member of the fire hall for quite a while, and that was great. And then she retired, and then another, we have, it's like a revolving door. There's not much I can do about it, or our staff can do about it. Is we advertise, person's hired, have the qualifications, they stay here for a while, then they leave. This last person we've hired, and I believe she's off sick. So,
Is there a way you can increase that budget and give them more hours?
so I can't answer the question, it's one at a time.
Go ahead. Somebody
Is
else?
there a way you can increase that budget to give them more hours?
Without our tax.
Or move money around.
Well, no, we cannot move money around. The money is in a service. We're not a municipality, so we can't move money.
Within the budget that is there, is there a better way to plan the money so that, you can afford a coordinator?
Well, what happens is if we want a more, not a part-time coordinator, a full-time coordinator, that'll be an increase in taxation. Are the residents prepared to pay for it? My job is to keep the taxation as low as possible and still provide the service. Why we're not providing the service is because the turnaround in employees, hopefully this lady that is sick right now will come back, will take on the task and continue providing recreation with weather type. And I call that number many times myself. I get a recording and one of the recordings was on there, you gotta put in your code. So I corrected that. But what happens is that generally, if there's nobody here, it'll be forwarded to Castlebar and they should respond to that question.
No, here,
It,
somebody else.
So if you've got somebody not working, does that mean the rec isn't happening? Because you've got a set budget for recreation. Our program's not being run? And if not, what happens to that one?
yeah, if we've got a program that's being run or whatever, it'll be run out of the Castlebar office or the Nelson office.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think too, the coordinator that's here, she does have her hours posted on the door. And if you go on the RDCK website, it also gives her hours there. And so you can reach her either by email or by phone. She was sick, I think she might be back. The other problem is we can't fault this just on a position change. I also believe they're just, what I'm hearing, they would like to see more programs offered. You can have a position here, but if there is not funding for programs to go ahead, that's sometimes where an issue exists, right? That's what I'm hearing from them, just my 2 cents.
So when you mention programs, if you advertise a program and you basically need at least 10 or 8 people to make that program run, but if you only got 2 people registered for the program doesn't run.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I remember Craig Lawrence doing the chores as a recreation individual who put in countless hours, his own time, begging and borrowing from different stores and that to get prizes. And I'm just very disappointed in what's happened over the last decade.
Unfortunately, I agree with you, and Craig has retired.
Yeah.
And when we bring in somebody, they're not, currently, most of them are not a resident of the Slocan Valley.
There's where the problem.
That is correct.
So why don't you find somebody in the valley?
We try, and there's nobody qualified to run the programs in the valley. There is a criteria, like when you advertise for a job, you have to have certain qualification to qualify for that job. And we don't have applicants from the Slocan Valley. But I believe the current person that's going to be running rec now is a resident of Slocan Valley.
She is.
So hopefully we'll get on board and we will start running programs just like Craig Lawrence used to.
What does the TV Society do?
Nothing.
I'm just curious.
The TV Society, good question. We have a TV Society and they deliver, I believe, about 4 or 5 channels off air. So you have to have an antenna to receive that. Like some people cannot Shaw cable or Shaw satellite, that they're over $100. Here it's only taxation, and they have sites that they cover the lower portion of Slocan Valley. Now, if you can call me, Peter Cable used to be the president of that, and he answered the calls, and he would be able to inform me a lot better what channels are available. So they have, I believe, 1 or 2 sites that they transmit off air. So if you get the antenna, you'll be able to get the signal off air, but it's limited how many channels you'll be able to access.
How much is that television thing?
What is the tax on the telephone?
Slocan defined area, so the south one, 220, $25,000.
Yeah, north of Windlaw, it hasn't been working for the last month.
And that's, the call is to Peter Cable, he's the president.
Okay.
And he's the one that looks after maintaining those sites or gets somebody to go up there and maintain it.
And how many sites are there? Or is it a lot of people?
Well, as far as I know, 2 sites.
Just 2?
Well, as
no.
far as I know, they could have more, you know, Peter Cable's the
Okay.
one to answer that question.
Okay. I'm just curious.
Because what we do is the regional district does not run that society. We provide funds to an organization, it's called the Grant and Aid, that runs that service for us.
I see.
And they're the ones that provide all that information about the service.
Okay. So I just wonder why it's increasing, but I'll talk with Peter. I'm curious.
Yeah, going back to rec for a second, it's not clarification on when you mentioned we have nothing happening here as in terms of person getting rec programs, recreational activities, and you mentioned it runs out of Castlegar. Then what does that mean?
That means whatever, the registration is done through a computer system. So when they advertise the program that's going to be run, it's on there. So if you want to enroll that in that program, it's run out of Castlegar, the enrollment part. But the coordinator here administers the program locally.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that message back to our community services group, but the concerns about that rec service.
I have one more thing to ask about the coordinator role. Is that person able to create proposals for community events that will serve the community? Say that person ends up sticking around, they end up finding out what the locals want, et cetera, to be involved with. Are they then able to put programs that the community members want out as a proposal to get those funds used for that?
If they're recreation oriented, if it's a fundraising program, no. And I've been asked that
Not
question.
talking about fundraising.
No, I've been asked that question before about fundraising. No, it's got to be recreation oriented. If it's not recreation oriented, no, they don't do that.
Is there a list anywhere, what is recreation oriented? Like for seniors, like, is there possibly a bridge club? Would that come under recreation?
And I think Lorraine can answer that. We
I'm asking you. And you're the head guy for area 8.
We do.
Okay, if you want,
We
me
have a
to.
program right here, at Slocan Park Hall.
Tuesday.
It every Tuesday, it's geared for seniors.
Yeah,
Basically, it's
I've been twice.
yeah, coffee gathering, people can come and play, I don't think they play bridge, but they play cards, they play board games. We have the occasional speakers come in, we have soup days, we have the public library from Nelson come in once a month, that type of thing. How are we funded? We have to apply for grant, because it is actually the Slocan Park Hall who runs that.
Well,
Recreation
that's great,
fund.
but that's not what I'm asking.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude anyway. I'm simply asking people who wanted to play bridge on a Tuesday night instead of at noon on Tuesday, would there be, and I'm just using that as an example, could be playing cribbage, it could be anything you want it to be. I'm asking how that would be fit into recreation.
Okay.
To spend some of that 221,000 just being blown out the window.
Okay, so what I would suggest is call the recreation programmer, tell the programmer what program you're interested in, and she should be able to answer whether it's viable or not, or set it up for you And as long as there's enough registration, there's cost recovery on that too. There's a certain portion of that should be covered or would be covered by people participating in that program. Or that program could be run based on the $220,000 that you're talking about. And that's the programmer's job. That's what we pay her to do. And I'm
So-
sorry if I didn't answer your question. I'm not involved in programming at all. Okay.
Just checking to see if there's a question from the public. Didn't see one.
Yeah, I have a question. My hand is
Sorry,
up.
from online. Also proceed. I think we talked about the village of Slocan, the taking a second for it to catch up.
Can you see my hand? It's up. It was up. Can I ask a question?
Oh, Lord.
Are parks on that? Recreation and parks sometimes go together.
There's another park service.
Okay. For area 8, what might that be?
Okay, here.
So for Area H, what we've got is a regional park service where New Denver, Silverton, Slocan, and Area H participate in. And the two parks in the southern portion of Area H that are part of that regional park service is the Crescent Valley Beach Park and the Winlaw Park. And then when you move further north, we've got Bigelow Bay, we've got Parklands, we've got Galena Trail, and those are the basic parks in the northern portion.
Okay. One for Stola.
That is not a regional park, it's a local park currently. And Crestova, and there's a park that is with the South Slocan where the old schoolhouse is. RDCK owns that property and they're trying to develop it into a park. And they're doing fundraising along with support from the regional district.
Okay. There's not, I have a son who's in Stola, so I go up and visit him. I've never seen any signage that says area park, local park anywhere. Is there a reason? Is there no parking for it or what?
We are working on that, and to develop a park takes, it's not developed overnight, it takes a while. So the intent was to purchase the property first. We have purchased that property, and the regional district owns that property. And now,
Cost.
what was that again?
What was the cost of
$875,000.
to the regional district?
No.
Total.
Total. And there was a group that did the fundraising.
Yeah.
And they raised a bigger portion of that cost.
Okay. I'm only asking the question because if you drive into the Winlaw Park right now, you might lose your vehicle in the holes in the road because it's not maintained and it should be paved. Just like the one at Crescent Valley.
Gravel would be fine.
Pardon?
Gravel would be cheaper, I think.
Well, gravel might be cheaper, but if you put a little pavement on it, it lasts a lot longer.
But that road is maintained by YRB. And we do put money forward again. But if you want it paved, you're looking at a tax increase.
Okay, we got a question online. Somebody's been waiting patiently. Shirley, can you try talking?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
just, can't hear you, so I need to.
Testing,
Check my volume.
testing. Testing, can you hear me now? Testing.
Sorry, Shirley, can't hear you, so.
Okay, I'll
You're
put it in
online.
the chat.
Second. Oh, here it is.
You can read it for us.
Okay, I'll read it, Shirley, thank you. You said that taxes were higher in this area due to higher assessments of property for new buyers. Well, I bought a property in area H, BC assessment assessed it for 48% higher than market value. I disputed this, won the dispute, the information is not yet updated on the B assessment website. It makes you wonder how many other mistakes such as this has, have been made. Yeah, so that potential does exist. And so if there's any disputes that were successful or appeals that were successful, there's one more kick of the can at these changes in assessment values. And we get what's called a revised assessment that comes out before the end of the March. So any successful appeals will adjust those values. But when we're talking at about 160 million or more value of property, a few individual appeals are unlikely to change that more than you know a fraction of a percent. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so we'll jump into the 2025. Okay, so 2025 overall outlook. So the average increase for the entire regional district currently is sitting, tax increase is 6.5%. So we did a bit of a survey, a few RDs municipalities, and that comes in lower than what we saw on average. We saw a range probably of about 7 to 9% with other RDs and municipalities. So we're currently sitting on the lower end, but again, everybody's budgets are subject to change, so that could change. So the almost $46 million of total tax requisitions for 2025 is $700,000 lower than we had originally forecast last year. So the CPI increase, inflation increase on staff salaries and director pay is 3.3%. That's from the BC CPI index. So decreasing interest rates are reducing interest charges on some short-term loans, but also impacting investment income. And we're continuing work on implementing a new asset management plan. So that's become not only growing, it is actually a requirement from several external grant streams, particularly Community Works. So Community Works is a federally funded infrastructure grant that the federal government pays to municipalities and local governments in Canada. And the regional district qualifies for about $1.5 million every year, but now that's contingent on us having a formal asset management plan. And as part of that plan, we've got a new asset management specialist position as part of the roadmap that's planned for 2025.
Is there not one from last year, asset management?
No, this is the one new position in this year's plans. We haven't hired that. So prior to this, asset management was we didn't have one person in the organization focused on that. Every department looked at it the best as they could, and this brings a formality to the process. So last year, what we had was an asset management road mapping project where we had a consultant come in and look at all of our assets and put a roadmap together, and that project was funded by grants as well. So one of the main recommendations was having this specialist position, which is becoming the norm or is becoming the norm in local governments.
So that won't be duplicating anything that was done last year then?
No, that's entirely new position.
So why is it not a consultant? Why is it a permanent position?
Basically, because it basically requires, a full-time focus, and the cost of consultant would be, 2.5 to 3 times the cost of an employee.
And you'd have to rehire a consultant every year, is that?
Yeah, we would have to rehire a consultant. So it's an ongoing, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing, position to manage the organization's assets over a long period of time. So it's instead of, looking forward 1 or 2 years or being reactive, it's planning 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ahead. What's coming, how much money should be set aside in reserves. So it gives sort of better transparency, and as well as accountability for each service, and being able to plan, what should we be planning for as far as major repairs or replacements. Most of the work will go towards some of the larger facilities. We have 3 large rec facilities. But then we also have about 20 water utilities. All our fire halls need an asset management focus, as well as any of the smaller buildings and halls.
So this person's job would be to look at all these different facilities.
Yeah.
And see where there can be reduction in costs, or you can be run it more efficiently. Is that the idea?
That's part of it, but it's maintaining them to get a longer life cycle and putting money and investments where it makes the most sense in any given service. And funding for it, so you don't end up with a surprise. There's been communities, for instance, I don't know if you've heard, the village of Asuyas or the town of Asuyas had several years in a row of extremely high tax increases because they didn't put any money into they put hardly any money into their assets, didn't have any reserves, and they were hit with 30+% tax increases per year. So Asuyas wasn't the only one. There's been other municipalities in Canada that ended up in the same position, and that's why the federal government's and actually through the federal what's it called, the local government organization says no, there needs to be some prudence and some formality to this process, and we can't have local governments getting into that position where assets aren't managed and funded as well as they should be.
And so someone could go and take a look at the justification for that and watch it as it unfolds to see if this was worthwhile. And there has to be see if it is doing what it says it's going to do.
Yeah, there'll be a way, because now there's going to be a process when a service can look at and say, look forward 20 years and have a better justification of this is the funding that we should be putting in reserves. Or you know what, here's an asset in question and we probably should be doing some sort of assessment on it sooner or later. So it's really about investment decisions and long-term financial planning. So a question often comes up, oh, how do you know that that reserve level is right? That $1 million, that sounds high. And somebody else says it sounds low. This adds some more science to it that you can say, well, here it is, looking forward 30 years, this is what it should be. If anybody's familiar with a strata council at an apartment or a townhome complex, they have to do basically like a depreciation report every 7 years, and that's what it does. It says it'll look forward 20 or 30 years and say you have to do your roof then, your doors have to replace then, your windows there. You add it all up and you say this is the amount. This is what your strategy should be. So this is what the asset. Part of the asset management position is to say you should be putting $500,000 or $250,000 aside every year into your reserve fund to fund your assets. So it gives better visibility into what your assets truly cost you.
Interesting.
Okay. Okay, 2025 challenges and opportunities. So I'm sure as many are you aware, and it made the news today. Foreign trade, including tariffs and counter tariffs, will certainly have some level of impact to Canada-wide, the province, and our local governments. Potentially leading to increased procurement costs. We buy a lot of supplies, anything to do with construction, or you're replacing windows or in our aquatic centers, those from certain rec centers, we can see some increased costs. Slowing economic activity, if the recession hits, so that could hit us with lower building permit, waste disposal, and potentially recreation fee revenue. And if things could get more severe, that could have a wider effect. So I would say definitely one of the biggest challenges as we've seen since well, not too long ago since the pandemic hit, but on an economic perspective, this it's going to be hard to say what exactly is going to happen, but it definitely could be a big challenge. The Canadian dollar has been fluctuating, so it came down, came back up a bit, so that could lead to increased costs. New federal government's going to come sometime this year. I think the election has to happen by October 20th. Right now, the impact's uncertain. And then the other one of the opportunities that's in the news a lot, if anybody follows technology news, is artificial intelligence. The technology is definitely evolving quickly, lots of hype, speculation, and some of it's actually real. So it's evolving quickly. So we're currently seeing some limited of those successful use in the regional district. With our AI, artificial technology, we need to be mindful about accuracy and privacy concerns. And we are working on a strategy and including staff training components.
What is AI being used for currently?
Mainly to help write reports and to summarize reports. So nothing, it hasn't made a big change, but it's certainly reduced the time that staff are putting into some of their tasks.
There was a question there.
Oh, okay, thank you for noticing that. I see two in chat. Okay, question is, asset management's special role include condition assessment of existing publicly funded stock? So our condition assessments, we've actually done a few on our assets. So there's already a ton of information that we've compiled over the last few years. So our water utilities, our major rec centers, our fire hall's seen of this. So this asset management specialist is actually going to take a lot of use a lot of those assessments and put it into a asset management application and use that to help drive some of those future decisions. So this position is fairly unique. It requires both sort of an engineering and technical understanding of assets, buildings, equipment, machinery, and it also involves a fairly high level understanding of dollars and numbers and forecasting. So that's one of the reasons it's referred to as a specialist. Yes, question?
Yes, yeah, I was wondering, community halls, they wouldn't be considered a publicly funded, right?
If it's owned by the regional district, then it's considered publicly funded. Yeah, so any regional district hall, fire hall, again, water utility, would be considered a publicly funded asset.
If it's owned by you.
If it's owned by the regional district, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, we do, the regional district does fund some community halls that are owned by communities. So those would not be encompassed under this position.
So then I have a question.
Sure.
What is the advisory planning commission? So apparently Area H has had no active advisory planning commission. We've never had one, so, but we've been paying for one. Why is that?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that one. It's because we have no planning in area, so
But why are we paying for
you're not paying for it. That was money left over from the former director that's still in the fund, and it's slowly being used up for administration for transferring from year to year and year until that fund's exhausted. There is no taxation for an advisory planning commission in area H. The dollars that are shown there is the money carried over from the former director. Because he did have an advisory planning commission when he developed the official community plan on the northern portion of Area H. And then when I got elected or whatever, I disbanded that advisory planning commission. There was no need for it. Basically, any area that has zoning, that's when you need an advisory planning commission. And I know I sat on one when Bob Barkley was there. We had an advisory planning commission, but we were just a sounding board for him. That was not the requirement for an advisory planning commission, and he did tax.
Okay, continue on. Okay, we'll go through, I think about a dozen services. So general administration, service S100. This is a service that everybody in the regional district pays into, all municipalities, all electoral areas. So this includes corporate administration, finance, IT, HR, CEO, and the municipal directors. So this service is seeing an 8% taxation increase. One of its bigger projects, $138,000 for roof replacement, Lakeside office. From an HR perspective, recruitment efforts, some of the drivers there. We've definitely seen an increase in applicants for positions during COVID. There was definitely a lack or less applicants, but some of the impediments there are now housing availability, mainly the cost of it, as well as a high expectation for wages and compensation. We have a few IT projects on the go related to SharePoint and Microsoft 365 and cybersecurity resiliency. A new website announcement should be coming soon, and probably in the next few weeks. And then also the board of directors approved an organizational review process that will commence this year.
What is SharePoint? What is it?
SharePoint is it's an online file storage system. So we actually pay for it as part of Microsoft 365, but it lets you. It's a modern way to do sort of records management. So the regional district has about 2 million files, digital files, and they're using older technology to sort of track those, and we don't have a formal records management process. So SharePoint allows us to do that.
So it's like a database.
It's like a database. It's a Microsoft.
They can upload their PDFs and Excel
PDFs, Excel files, all into the cloud. So okay, I thought I saw.
You said it was an 8% tax increase?
Yeah.
Well, that would make up for not necessarily your increase in assessment when you guys are adding 8%.
Yeah, but it's done.
I don't know how it's done.
Yeah, it's done. Separate.
Is that 8% increase related to your 8% tax increase to the residents?
Yeah, that 8%, it's a little bit below than the average increase to area H.
That's what I would word it at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just gonna check a couple of online questions.
What's it say?
Has the district considered dedicated staffing for fund mobilization development? There are a number of provincial and federal grants and contributions that can be assessed to fund development, revitalizations, or remediation, for instance, UBCM. So we do Depending on the department, we do track many of those funds. We are part of UBCM, so we get all the information for UBCM about these funds. And I mean, a bunch of these fund streams come through us automatically. Well, after we sign the agreement, for instance, the community works funding. We do have a funds position dedicated to tracking funds and how they're distributed, and who's getting what, and making sure that all the we do all the right paperwork and reports to make sure we remain qualified. But we do, yeah, we do a fairly thorough look at both federal, provincial, as well as CBT grants. Well, there's the ready grants that are managed through the regional district, but there's CBT grants outside of that. Our fire services annually submit applications for UBCM fire training grants, which I'll talk about. So there's a fairly thorough process for checking to grants that are potentially available to fund regional district services. One of the risks with funds, and this is often talked about at the board table, is yes, there might be a grant available, and it might cover a good chunk of costs, but then you end up with some ongoing costs after that. And we just need to be aware of sometimes what yourself into when you do get a other times you almost have no choice. The provincial government says, "Oh, we want you to look after emergency management to a greater degree than you have been. We change our legislation, and you have to do it. And we're going to smooth it over a bit by giving you $250,000 to adjust to the new legislation." So yes, the $250,000 is a one-time cost, but the overall long-term cost is downloaded. Our board of directors, well, if I can speak to it a bit, does, through UBCM and such, challenge the provincial government on, and let them know that this downloading of costs certainly impacts our taxpayers. So.
And a good example would be our fire service. The province decided through the fire commission and the provincial fire that our fire service should have interior and exterior training equivalent to a professional firefighter. And, I was there and got up and, get up and off. I says, hey, when you download services like that, their training or whatever, send us a bag of money. Because ongoing, and they do provide certain funding, but it doesn't cover it all. So, and this is why your fire service tax goes up or whatever. Then the volunteers say, hey, we only used to go for a practice on Tuesday. It was a social get together, 4 hours, and that was it. Now we're spending our weekends training. So we want to get paid. And the fire chiefs say, well, we're coordinating all this on behalf of the regional district. We want an increase in pay. So it's like a snowball rolling downhill.
Well, usually what I found in working with government that way is that there's a committee in government that makes those decisions. And so you can say, we appeal, and then put your arguments together and send it to that committee. Now, it doesn't always work, but there should be a committee within the provincial government that made that decision.
Well, it was the fire commissioner that made that decision. So whether he has a committee or not,
Yeah,
it's a different service or a different arm of the provincial government.
yeah, I know, yeah.
There's a question here.
Was there anything extra downloaded from the province for this specific year, 2025?
And I'll talk a bit coming up. There was large changes to the Emergency Disaster Management Act. So our Emergency Management Department has a lot of work to do in updating our policies and our procedures and processes because of changes to that act. And we're just getting started on it. Okay, next service I'll talk a bit about here is the rural administration. So 25% taxation increase. So this service includes regional fire services overhead. So that's the oversight coordination of the 21 RDCK fire protection and 911 services, including structural protection unit, BC wildfire service deployments, and firefighter training. Most of these overhead costs are allocated to the fire protection services, and we're expecting almost a $500,000 grant again from UBCM to fund some of that firefighter training. And then there's 75,000 to be funded from reserves for a new command vehicle in 2025. The other large part of this service is bylaw enforcement. This includes noise, animal control, unsightly nuisance property zoning, and soil removal deposit bylaw enforcement. And reminder, bylaws vary by electoral areas. So depending where you live, there's a range of different bylaws in place that the bylaw enforcement might have to deal with. Okay. Next service is GIS, S102. Oh, wait for a second, come on. And so this provides the regional mapping services for internal external clients, including our public web map, which is available from our website, mapping for our fire services, emergency services, including mapping of evacuation alert and order areas. So on the right-hand side, there is the evacuation order area for, I believe, the Argenta fire last year. So this service was really busy last summer, working with the emergency management. So relatively small tax increase of 3%, and a number of projects underway in that department this year.
What is kinematics?
Kinematics is a unit that I'm not a GIS expert. If anybody here is, please chime in. That it uses to measure. It's like a measurement tool for GIS that does measurements. And then NG91 is next generation 911. Oh, here we go. RDCK is a sub-meter accuracy GPS unit for survey grade data collection. Thank you.
That's your answer.
So if anybody's wondering why these slides take so long to advance, it actually goes to space first, comes back, goes to this projector. Building inspection service S103 is so seeing a 26% taxation increase. So permit revenue softened considerably last year. The budget was $950. It actually came in at about $636. Because of this, 2 open building inspection positions were removed from the budget. So we removed about $200,000 from the service, and they remain removed while activity remains low. And with the building inspection department, one of their things that they do spend a lot of time is staying current with the revisions to the BC building code. And then as well, the other potential impact on the service is some new accounting standards about how we recognize fee revenue. Yes, question?
So if you're removing 2 positions, why is there still 26% tax increase? Because that would take away those wages, and if you already removed like almost more than $300,000, so it doesn't make sense.
No, yeah, so there are a couple of things here. So the original budget for this service was for this year with those 2 positions was about from a taxation perspective, I believe it was about 1.4 million. Now it's about 1.1. So otherwise the taxation increase would have been a fair bit higher than that, probably about 45%. So the 25 is after we remove those two positions. So the softening of the reduction in permit revenue is one of the primary drivers of that increase.
Has there ever been,
Double the budget.
has there ever been a case where the building is boomed and the,
Sorry, one question at a time. Go ahead. Yeah, you go.
okay, so
Yeah, I'll let
has
you
there ever
finish.
been a case where when building has boomed, that there's actually been a decrease? Because the revenue has been so good?
I've only been with the original district 3 years, so I think what that's allowed it to do. So there was a bit of a boom in 2022, 2021. I think that allowed taxation to remain relatively flat. And some buildup in reserves.
Yeah.
Is what happens.
That was my, we have a stabilization reserve, so we don't get, a peak, and so we try to keep it level, and it's always on an incline. So whenever we get a boom where a lot of building permits would generate the money or whatever, we put it in what we call a stabilization reserve. And then, when we get a drop in permits, we try to level out the taxation. And when you get a permit, the permit that you pay for, it drags out over 2-3 years by the time you finish building. But you pay it in the year that you apply for. So we have to make it last that long.
Okay. Planning and land use. So this department is responsible for zoning, land use and development applications, development of long-term community plans, and administers the bylaw standards and policies. So 18% taxation increase. It is receiving some provincial funding to address changes in housing regulations and is working on subdivision servicing bylaws, floodplain bylaws, and regional and local community needs projects. Question from the public.
As I say,
All right. Do you anticipate removing these inspections will increase permitting timelines? Is this being tracked for future planning? No, it shouldn't. We looked at the levels, and those there, because of the decline in building permits, it shouldn't increase the permitting timelines. Okay, West Resource Recovery. So this is the regional district is mandated to provide waste services, resource recovery services for the entire regional district, including the municipalities. So it's the regional district is divided into 3: east, central, and west. So west is for waste services. So west is from Castlegar through the Slocan Valley up to Nakusp. This includes the transfer stations, recycling depots, landfills, as well as the transportation of materials. So this service is seeing an 8% taxation and 10% tipping fee increase. Some change in some initiatives listed below that to do with contaminated wood waste. The transfer station upgrades are nearly complete. The two I guess Roseberry and the Cusp. The Cusp landfill closure planning underway. Legacy landfill assessments. Commercial and rural organics diversion initiatives continue. Some planning for Ishenia landfill and then for eco depots. Yes, question?
so what do you mean by legacy land?
Great question. So there are legacy landfills that predate even the regional district. So these are landfills that have been around, I don't know, since the 50s or 40s. And by provincial statute, the regional district is responsible to some degree for the environmental concerns surrounding them. So we have to do these assessments, and potentially there might have to be some mitigation efforts with some of these aging landfills, legacy landfill sites.
So is that mean like the one down at Kootenai Lake there?
I'm not familiar with all.
One Kootenai Lake?
Yeah, I think there's a couple around Kootenai Lake. Boswell might be one. I might be wrong. And there's one somewhere in the north end of Kootenai Lake. I think there's about 4 or 5 of them throughout the regional district.
What about Castle?
I'm not familiar with any legacy ones in Cass. Yes.
Probably not going to be getting the answer I need here, but I'm just curious about this. Where do I go to get some information on the site?
I would go to the website, and for resource recovery, there should be a contact number there. And there, yeah, and
I mean, given looking when you look at it, factually, that somewhere between 9 and maybe 20% of stuff is actually recycled. I'm just sort of wondering. I want to start getting some answers. But I could do some research. So.
yeah, there's been a lot of work on what they call diversion. So recycling is a diversion of waste. Basically, everything can be considered waste. So recycling is one. Organics is another. And they don't always pay for themselves. Like you look, the statements, recycling subsidized as well as organics. But what it allows you to do is extend the life of your landfills. Organics are really bad in a landfill because they do 2 things. They create leachate, which is against regulation, and you get leachate into the ground. And then they also create release of gases, which are another no-no. So on those pictures on the upper right-hand side is the Salmo Organics composting facility, which just got going last year. And on the bottom right-hand side there is at the Creston landfill. And so once an area of the landfill is full, we use these cells. You basically need to cover them up with a layered mix of different types of soil. That material there, synthetic, almost like a tarp, and then more soil. That's to keep basically keep moisture from getting into there and to keep gas from escaping. So there's sort of a managed perforated pipe that takes the gas out into in a controlled manner. Yes.
Do they ever expect that to deteriorate underground?
Sorry?
If they're blocking moisture from going in and they're putting a cover tarp over top of it, how is whatever they're putting in there, be it can, there's going to be certain garbage in it, but like the stuff that can deteriorate, how do they ever expect it to deteriorate if they're putting this huge tarp over it and preventing any exchange for proper composting of that stuff?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, and that's a good question. I could speculate. It's probably deterioration and is might be worse for the environment than not deteriorating. It's not like compost in your backyard that you can go and use. You've probably got a range of materials that you might not want to have deteriorate in an uncontrolled manner. So that's what I'm guessing. It's why we do that, and this is regulated. This isn't something the regional district is doing on its own. This is part of a environment waste management plan using best practices.
Is there anybody in Canada that you know of using incineration? I understand they do that successfully in other countries in Europe, for instance.
Yeah, the only one I'm aware of is in Vancouver. I think they might have one or two. I think there's one right off the Canby Bridge. There's some, I don't know, and then there might be one in Delta somewhere. So, those, facilities are really expensive. And the most expensive part of them is actually the parts of them to capture all the precipitates, gases, and noxious things that come out of it is probably at least half the cost of the facility, because you can insulate anything. It's about, you don't want to now release um, um, I don't know, burnt plastic and wherever else in the atmosphere. So I roast, I did ask our resource recovery team about that. And it would probably be cost prohibitive. Maybe some aspects, if you could sort it, you can sort up some cleaner burning things, but again, there would probably be a high cost.
So we did look at that quite a few times, especially at the old senior landfill. And what we found out is by talking to companies that do the incineration, whatever, we don't have enough waste to get a payback on it. You need the volume, because the equipment that you put in there is quite cost prohibitive unless you have the volume. So the bigger towns or whatever, municipalities do have that, but we don't.
Okay. Arts, okay. So S203, this is the Parks for Slocan service for most of the valley. Some highlights here. The major projects in 2025, Crescent Valley Beach. Addition to, I'll just read some. Anka made a comment. Health authorities consider it biohazard and it is very expensive. So, yeah, which is exactly what we were talking about. So some work at Crescent Valley Beach, Galena Trail, installation of a new bridge there. Roseberry Parkland, some landscaping and fuel mitigation work. Was some of that's complete in 2024. Bigelow Bay, some Washington Trail enhancement, and then a special thanks to the Roseberry Community Association for their contribution. And then there was one seasonal parks maintenance position that was made a full-time position to support all regional district parks maintenance. So area H231 parks. So this one, Campbell Fields, Recreation, Campbell Field. Some work there for danger tree removal, Christova, entry and park boundary signage, gates, and bollards. So I think that goes to your question about signs and such. So that work's planned this year. And some work and planning at the old schoolhouse site for some foundation work there. So recreation, this is to do with programming highlights. So first aid courses, summer camps. There was some success last year that we offered again this year. Some swim lesson courses, instructor recruitment. It's very important to have instructors you can put programs on, as well as some youth safety programs. And then some additional highlights. Annual tea event, equipment rentals, some work in New Denver, and some community recreation grants. Just one more. And then there's a regional parks, trails, and water access strategy that's underway to define future direction and policies, numerous working group meetings, and that initiative is slated to be completed in the fall of 2025. Yes,
So
question.
if they hire certain people to do this stuff, are these people going to be qualified in making sure they're not destroying stuff that is natural to the environment? Like, for instance, in the Winlock Park, there was a whole bunch of wild ginger that used to grow there, and there's what do you call those trees? Yew trees Some of these yew trees were like at least 100 or more years old. And they were cut. The ginger, the wild ginger was trashed. So are these people gonna be experienced and not ruining the environment ecologically?
It's a good question, and when we hire somebody to go in there, the expectation is that they don't, like, the trees that were cut were identified as danger trees. And you know, when the public goes to use that park or whatever, so we get an assessment on that, so whether it's a danger tree or not, so they get cut. And what you're talking about, the ginger, I'm not familiar with that. The boardwalk that we had there was decaying, so we basically hired somebody to go in there and replace that boardwalk. So during that boardwalk, some of that could have been damaged.
Well, I do recall some of those yew trees, and what they were doing is actually providing shade for the wild ginger. And they were not a danger tree, as I'm familiar with wildlife danger trees, I took that course years ago, and I do assessments and that. So I did see that there were trees there that were not a danger, but were cut, and there were a lot of yew trees that was a travesty.
So what we do is we hire somebody, we don't, the regional district itself doesn't assess whether it's a danger tree. We hire somebody to go in there, or we might, now, we're at a point where we do have somebody that has the training to assess where it's a danger tree. And we always face that because public uses it. If the tree falls on somebody, we're liable for that. So,
Yeah, I understand.
and they assess that and they recommend that those trees be removed. So we, you know, I'm not an expert on trees, far from it. But our staff that goes out there and assesses them or hires someone to assess them tells us it's a danger tree. Once they tell us it's a danger tree, if something does happen, then we are on the hook for it.
Yeah, because it opened up the ground and a lot of the ginger.
Yeah.
They're,
Did I see that you were having a full-time parks person? Is that, have I got that?
One of the maintenance positions was seasonal or.
Right.
And for the region as a whole, it's become a full-time position.
Region as a whole, as in all the regional districts or just area?
All the outdoor areas. So we don't have parks, staff dedicated just to H. They're shared throughout the region.
It would just make sense if somebody from parks would be overseeing and making sure those that's the thing that actually happened there. That should have been easily protected.
Well, and that's exactly what happened. Is the person that responsible for parks is the one that's goes to the commission, talks to the commission or whatever, and they say, well, look, some of these streets or whatever we were told. So he is the one that hires somebody to go out there and assess the streets.
Question online. How's RDCK meeting its legislative requirement to enact DRIPA in parks management? Good question. Do you want to?
I don't know what legislative requirement they're talking about.
DRIPA, the
DRIPA. We have so many acronyms. The DRIPA doesn't mean anything to me.
Nothing to do with First
indigenous people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We are in touch with the indigenous. Any work we do, most of the time has to be approved by consultation. And what we do is we send out a request for input on the work that we're doing.
And does it go to all of the First Nations that have claims?
No, it goes to the First Nations that the province tells us that are involved in our particular area.
I see.
Like, for example, the Crescent Valley Beach Park was donated. But when where it sits there was a sawmill there. So when we went in there to develop it, we took a look at, there could have been we did a referral to the indigenous people that are responsible for that area. They came back, no, do not dig up the ground. We want our person there sifting every piece of soil through there. And then the second nation came out there. So we had 3 technicians out there from the 3 different nations that were responsible for that area. And even though there was a sawmill there, but what I'm told, there was some stuff recovered there. So it was a good thing. And it did, you know, I mean, people ask, why does it cost so much to develop a park? All the legal requirements that we have to meet, like you said, Gripa, if that's what it is. And then we have to do an assessment, environmental impact assessment on that too. So we don't have any experts, we have to hire somebody to come in there, like the Crystal Park. There's a lot of, history on that park. So we had to hire an environmental assessment to go out there. There's a pond in there. I remember when I was a child, I used to skate on that pond. But that pond has, I believe turtles or frogs that are endangered species. So we did hire somebody to go in there. So it's going through the whole process.
And these are mandated by the province. Province is telling you that these have to be done.
That part, I don't know whether the province is telling us or not, that is something that we looked at. And we had Ryan Durant to take a look at it for us. And he says, yes, it needs an environmental impact assessment. So we're going through it.
Question online. RDCK has legal obligation to enact but it's challenging but necessary. Yeah, I know it's definitely,
Challenging.
it's challenging, and we participate with First Nations and Indigenous, peoples in a lot of the work that we do.
Through our referral process.
Western CP state.
People.
Okay.
Yeah, people.
So one water utility in Area H South, South Slocan, seeing 0% parcel tax increase, 7% user fee. Some engineering assessment work and upgrades to some, what is that? It's almost 80-year-old water mains.
Yes, go
I
ahead.
heard discussion was carried out in the RDCK, so I'm not sure that I haven't heard from the RDCK themselves, but that there's a water line being planned to put along the rails to trails from Slocan all through the valley. Is this true?
That's, as far as I know, is a rumor, and I do not believe that our water services department is aware of that. I mean, there was a rumor circulating that there was gonna be a water line placed from Nelson to South Slocan, so. But it could be in the future, so I won't discount that.
Okay. Next slide is going to be about emergency planning. So this goes back to the Emergency and Disaster Management Act that was recently enacted. Discussion we had. So 6% taxation increase, the implementation of EDMA. So work on our emergency plans, risk assessments, business continuity plans. This act also regulates a multi-jurisdictional approach. And aligning our bylaw, policy, procedures, and templates, and then expansion of the neighborhood emergency preparedness program. This department's also working on increasing capacity of our emergency support services, and utilizing emergency preparedness grants. CBT $230,000 CBD community readiness partnership. Also implementing recommendations from the 2024 wildfire season review, and then various fire smart activities, including rebates, neighborhood recognition, that are funded through the UBC Fire Smart program.
So I think probably the one that the Slocan Valley Watershed and Forest Protection Society might be interested in is the new $230,000 Columbia Basin Community Readiness Partnership.
So the regional district's also responsible for the contracting out the services for 911 communications, as well as some infrastructure. So we don't actually have our own dispatch center, but we contract out one to 911 dispatch in Kelowna, and then fire dispatches through Prince George. So there's a fairly large increase there. And then continued migration to next generation 911. So that's where basically moving 911 from an analog to digital service. So sometime in the future, you'll be able to use your smartphone and text and do all those sort of things with 911. That capacity is not there right now, the capability. I think just today I read that the country as a whole is behind on this. So the federal government's given a 1 or 2 year extension on this. And then some ongoing infrastructure replacement, including repeaters to be funded from reserves. So overall, this service is seeing a 28% taxation increase.
Will it still be able to call 911 on your regular phone?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's not going to go.
And in the near future, it'll be run by AI.
It could very well be. Yeah. So fire protection. A second here. So service S142. So region-wide, continuing multi-year replacement, personal protective and other equipment to meet regulatory requirements. Continuing capital reserve contributions and utilizing some CBT wildfire readiness grants. So Area H, 4% taxation increase. So Area H, for those aren't aware, fire services, Crescent Valley, Passmore, Winlaw, and Slocan fire halls, so 4 fire halls. Some energy upgrades funded by community works grants. Continued focus on training to meet the Office of Fire Commissioner provincial requirements. And I believe it's Winlaw that's got a procurement of a fire apparatus or fire engine is in progress. Well, and then transit, couple services that Area H residents participate in. So region-wide, we're looking at there was a transit value studies completed last year, and that's going to drive a reinforcement plan. And I'll just talk about the next item as well. Service level review begins this year to drive potential changes for 2026. So there's the 2025 budget's basically baked in. It's based on agreements we signed with BC Transit last year. So the West Transit Committee members are meeting this year to talk about potential service changes for next year. The reason we're talking about this reapportionment, what that means is we have, besides these two, one other transit service in the West Kootenay in the regional district, and it's a really complicated model over 3 services with all kinds of really difficult to understand formulas. So what we're hoping to get to is one service with some very clear formulas of funding drivers that make sense. So that process is ongoing this year. So there's a long history why there's 3 services, because things were added piecemeal over a period of time. So North Shore Slocan Valley, service 238, 16% taxation increase. And again, operating increase with contract with BC Transit. And then Kootenay Lake West, S239, seeing a 35% taxation increase. A large amount of reserves were used up over the last year or two to reduce taxation. So we're seeing a bump up in place of that. And then again, an operating cost increase with a contract from BC Transit.
So by combining all that and having a better working model, will it decrease the taxation on it overall?
I wouldn't say it would. It would just make it more now basically I think more transparent and more fair of where that taxation goes. So depending what area you live in, it may increase or decrease your taxes. There might be some small benefits, but nothing that's going to be a dial turn. It's gonna make the administration of it, a bit simpler, but, not a huge amount, but it's gonna take considerable, administrative effort to get, these services combined because, it's anytime we're changing service, combining services, changing formulas and bylaws, we have to do a lot of upfront work ourselves, get all the directors to agree. And then it also has to go to the province, and the province reviews any of those changes that we're proposing. So yeah, at the end of the day, it'll be more transparent and probably more fair and more understandable, but it's going to take a bit of effort to get there.
Yeah, question of that.
Oh, thank you. All right. No, nothing.
No.
Nothing new.
What was that?
This is really in regards to DRIPA, which we've already discussed. Okay. Well, that's transit. I think that's the last one. Okay. So we got just a couple pie charts. So this, here's a second. So this pie chart basically details or shows the split of between services for in this case residents of the or property owners of the village of Slocan, and then it also shows the taxation per $250,000 on home value. You can't buy a home for $250,000, but what you do then is if your home's worth $500,000, you multiply by 2, $750 multiplied by 3, and so on. So if you're a resident of the village of Slocan, your RDCK tax bill, about 60% of that, actually more than 60%, almost 70, is going to be related to your fire service. And then transit is next, refuse is next, and then the rest divided up into smaller chunks. And if you're in area H, I'll give that a second to come up. Resident. Now your fire is about 40% or more of your tax bill. Transit another chunk, and then about I'm gonna say about a dozen other services at about 10% or less. So as you can see, fire is the largest portion of your tax bill.
40%?
Yeah, 40, 45.
Did you have a breakdown of the fire? Like how much goes to wages?
Yeah, so in this financial plan package, it's 230 pages. If you download it, it's on our website. There's service
142.
Yeah, service 142 will break it all out between wages, licenses, permits, contracted services. The other, insurance is one of those items that really increased last year, anywhere between 50 and 100% on our property and liability insurance. So a fairly large impact, and that hit the fire services for sure. The one of the largest increases for fire services going back, say, 5 years, is the cost of fire engines or fire apparatus. So 5 or 6 years ago, you can buy a brand new fire engine for around $400,000. They're closer to about $900,000 now in the course of 5 years. So as before, if you had $250,000 in reserves and maybe you have to borrow a little bit, now we, as many are aware, we have to go to referendum, and we have to borrow over 20 years now to fund our fire truck purchases.
Amazing.
Like we can do borrowing over 5 years without going to referendum.
Yeah.
But then, can you imagine what your tax bill would be on a $900,000 fire engine, especially when you're replacing them 2 or 3
Yeah.
in the area?
Yeah.
anything over longer than a 5-year period, we have to go to referendum like we did for the Linlaw.
Yeah, and it is a cost, and, but in a way that then the 20-year borrowing actually almost lines up with the regulatory life of that truck. So you're paying for that truck over its life, so, some people take the perspective, well, maybe that is the fair way to do it.
And the life could be 20 years or?
Well, that's by regulation at 20 years is how long you're allowed to, by regulation, run a truck, but you can get an extension. So we usually get an extension up to, up to 25 years old. But then you go look at sometimes a 25-year-old truck, they look brand new, they have, I don't know, 20,000 kilometers on them, but by fire regulation, for insurance purposes, we're not allowed to keep them. But just getting back to that borrow versus reserves discussion, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, depending on your asset. It's probably good to have some of it funded by reserves and some of it by borrowing. You could do it all by reserves. Your taxpayer is probably ahead not paying interest costs, but it's sort of a bit of a philosophical discussion. Yeah, question?
What percentage of that pie chart is for recreation service?
Okay, so I'm looking at 10, including park or excluding park? So, 41, so little, just under 10%.
Park? Yeah.
Okay, where are you parks?
There's two parks in there.
Okay.
There are some parks within the rec commission,
Yeah, there's one there for parks.
and the other one's the regional parks,
Yeah.
which is New Denver, Silverton, and Slocan.
Okay, I don't see that. I see the regional parks.
Yep.
Yeah, there.
And then this is the other one.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking.
Yeah, that's Presto, the proposed park in South Slocan, the old schoolhouse property, and what other parks in there? There's another park that's in there. I think you have it on your slide.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the detailed total dollar amounts for those first sheets in the financial.
And that would include Campbellfield.
There may be a new question, I'm not sure, something.
Oh, there's be something pop up. Oh, look at that. Is the regional parks at 31.7 contracting private operators, or does that include ministry funding? You understand that, Walter?
I don't know what they mean by ministry funding. We don't get ministry funding for that particular service unless there was a special grant available for it. And that would be a one-time shot.
Yeah. Yeah, so sometimes we do get some grant funding related to parks. Okay.
So just, a little bit more specific on that question about regional parks. That does not mean the province helps fund those parks. They're all taxed to the regional district. But any project that we have in the park, we can apply for grant funding towards. But that's only a one-time shot, not an ongoing.
Okay, so that was the last slide. Is there?
It looked like there was one more question.
No, just said thanks.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Very good presentation, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Question?
Any reserve funds that are not connected to specific services?
By legislation, every reserve fund has to be tied to a service. Yeah, we don't have a generic reserve.
Who is planning bicycle way from Castle to Nelson? Is it from the regional district or is it provincial or federal?
Haslo to Nelson?
No, from Nelson to Castle.
I think that's, you want to speak to that? It's a society that's proposing that.
Oh,
So it's a proposal so far.
the trail?
Yeah, the trail.
But that's not a service of the regional district. It's a society that's proposing that.
And that's to the Marin province, right? I'm assuming.
I think the society is looking for funding, from wherever, so they put a proposal together. I think they're looking for federal funding, to fund that project.
I guess it's called active transportation. Is that what you're talking about?
Basically, they say from Nelson to Kasuga, $166 million. This could be the regional district.
Yeah.
I see the budget here, right? Wait a second, yeah.
Well, that's not a service that regional district provides.
That's good to hear.
So just backtrack one bit about those reserves being tied to services. So, we have a reserve, so we get funding from, again, the federal government, those community works funds. Those all get, allocated out to electoral areas. And then, so we have a reserve, so each electoral area has its reserve of community works funds, but those are, very specific to where those funds, can be applied to. So directors, through discussions with various, the services will make decisions to allocate those either to, for instance, depending where you are, to say fire related, fire halls, and other, services. But with the provincial UBCM who administers those grants has really tightened up the rules on that. So, Director Popoff used to have more latitude to be able to give those to, some of those grants to, I don't know if you want to speak to it, to smaller, community groups, but something that's been taken away. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, a good example would be this hall here. And we were restricted to only use it on regional district owned facilities. This hall is not a regional district owned facility. So, in the past, we were able to do that. So in area H, we have 13 community halls. So I approached every community hall that wanted to do an energy retrofit, and it only had to be used for energy retrofits. You can't go out there and do something that's not energy savings related. So, we started with, I don't know which one was first, but Slocan Park Hall, Crestova Hall, Crescent Valley Hall, done Winlaw Hall, and as we go further up, Appledale Hall, all those halls, and as you see, our air source heat pumps was part of it.
Okay.
And the blinds, and I think Lorraine can probably speak to it a little bit more, what the energy retrofit grant was used for. And what would happen is, in the past, we hired a contractor that would apply or do the grant form. To fill it out is something that a layperson is gonna struggle with. So it had to be a qualified person did that. And then the regional district looked it over and came to the board and the board approved it. So, it was a lot of money, like this hall, I don't know what it cost, around $80,000. The typical grant was $100,000 per hall.
Wow.
For energy retrofits, like the Valakut Hall had one, or whatever. Some of them went all the way up to the 100, but the other one, because it's a smaller hall, didn't need all that extra money.
So
Well,
that's,
the big cost in those will get where the solar panels.
Solar, yeah.
that's so
Battery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a grant.
So there's a.
So now, the Union of BC municipalities said, no, you can't use those funds for what you've been using, Director Paul. But it's not only me, it's the regional district. We can't use those funds, so there are restrictions on it. And they're, I'm not too familiar with all the restrictions or whatever our environmental services department has that. So if we want to provide a grant which is the community works funds administered by the UBCM, we have to go to our grants person at the regional district and say, does this qualify? And it basically now is restricted to RDCK facilities.
The only thing they took sort of those third party, group, they made it less qualified. And what they added though was, fire apparatus and fire trucks. So now, before you couldn't use it for fire trucks, now they said fire trucks are important for, the safety and security of our homes, so they've allowed that.
So it changes from year to year.
Yeah, so last year, what I did is I used $240,000 allocated to Area H for the fire halls, for the exhaust systems that were put in the fire halls. So that was, this year, we have to do an architectural assessment of all the 4 fire halls, because those fire halls were built in 1980s. And that's part of asset management. Once we do the assessment, then we provide that information to the new employee that's being hired, and he will extrapolate it over a period of time.
Yeah.
And say, well, you've got to set aside this much in your reserves to replace that hall at a certain period. And that's where his expertise comes in.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So I wanna be able to understand accurately something here that I couldn't quite grasp in the beginning. So if a person's property tax assessment from the BC government came in at 10%. And you're wanting, let's say, the 8.9% increase. Does that get added over and above that 10%?
No.
That comes out of that 10%?
Well, the value of your home went up 10%.
Actually 19.
Yeah, so pardon? 19, wow, okay. So if your value of home went up 19%, what the 8.9% is the increase from in your tax bill from last year to this year. And it's got nothing to do with how much the value of your home went up. The only thing it has to do with that is if your home went up more than your neighbors, some of that increase is going to be related to in your tax bills, be related to you taking an additional share of some shared services. So your tax bill is not going to go up 19 plus 9, it's going to go up. In your case, if your home went up 19%, your tax bill is probably going to go up more than that. Right? So 9% increase in tax bill is based on what did I say the average increase was? 8% for Area H?
Yeah.
Something like that. So great question. So if your home went up 8%, then you would see an 8.9% increase in tax. If it went up more than that, then you're gonna see more than an 8.9% increase in taxes, but it's really hard to say exactly how much that's gonna be.
Well, I did notice that the assessment of that was totally done unfairly. Comparing because I went online to check and comparing our place to a property that was a little smaller, but that was living partly in a wetland of Hager Creek. And then compare it because that place had sold, and then comparing it to some other property that's way on the mountainside, and others that were like 200 and some odd $1,000 that are on a steep hill that you're never going to be able to build on. And I'm thinking, well, how fair was this assessment really? Because the neighbor who has 30 acres only got like a 6 or 7% increase, and I think it was possible. We've got to look at that.
Yeah, so it's late now, but basically, I mean, you basically, I think had till January 31st to file an appeal. So I know people who've been successful. I think somebody mentioned it online, and I know people who've appealed and been successful, and I know people who appealed and haven't been successful. So if it doesn't look right, then there's probably some basis and opportunity for appeal. So I would consider that for next year.
Oh yeah, but 2 days, you don't have time to appeal in 2 days.
So I've appealed a few times, and I was successful sometimes, not all the time.
Interesting.
And what the appeal board used to be a local appeal board. They've changed that. Now, when you request an appeal, you could be talking to appeal board in Kamloops or appeal board in Cranbrook that don't know our area. So in my opinion, this is only my opinion, and it's personal, not the regional district, is That's an unfair process. You know, I was more successful with a local
Yeah.
appeal board. And what they do is they don't look comparison, your property compared to anybody. What they use as a barometer for deciding is the local sales. So if your neighbor's property went up, sold it by 20% more than it was assessed last year, that's what they look at your property. Your property, in theoretically, should be 20% more than last year because of a local sale, not a comparable property. But a comparable property with a local sale is what they look at. And when you go to an appeal board, and I've done submissions that were 10 pages long, I get maybe 5 minutes to state my case. The assessor gets about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I don't know exact time, but it's a short period of time. And then they hear both cases. And then they say, okay, we'll go and make a decision. 10 pages that I submitted, and they're only gone for about 10 minutes and they come back with a decision. Obviously, they didn't have time to read all my submissions. So, in my opinion, the process is not a fair process, but it's a process that we have to follow. And if you disagree with their assessment, you can appeal it further up to a higher body that looks at it. But if you feel your assessment is not fair, based on the local sales in your area of comparable homes and properties, then file your appeal before the deadline.
Yeah, well, got it a little late with all that mail strike and everything too.
Oh, question back there.
This might be a more example, maybe you're not people to ask, but this whole land use, I know we don't have an official community plan in area. But yet many properties are still governed by the ALR. And then now I hear that RDCK is also involved in terms of like land usage, what you can use your land for, or how many structures you can have on your. What is the RDCK's involvement with that? What do they do?
Well, like I said, in the southern portion of RH, we don't have planning or zoning.
Right.
So your property is not zoned, but the assessment decides whether you're residential or commercial or not. That's what you're being assessed for. And we do have regulations that are basically a setback from a water course. Those are standard provincial regulations that you have. We do have floodplains when you're building something.
Yeah.
And if your land is in the ALR tells you what you can do with your land, not the regional district.
That was my question.
Yeah, so if your land's in the ALR, if you want to do something different with your property, you need basically ALR or ALC approval, which is the commission that represents the ALR.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, there's one there.
Basically, our taxes, property taxes have been increasing at least 10% per year. And it's come to the point where a lot of people's wages increase 2% maybe per year. Now you understand what's gonna happen eventually?
Yeah, no, it's a very fair observation. I mean, as you can see on the graphs, I mean, fire is about half your, depending where you live, about half your tax bill. And when, again, a fire truck, cost of a fire truck goes up 100% in 5 years, that has to be absorbed in one way or another from, by area taxpayers. So,
Well, there is some essential things that
yeah.
nobody's gonna dispute. We need police, we need fire. But you guys just hired some, woman as a liaison. I'm guessing $150,000 wage. And it didn't really have much of a description of what that was even for. Like, there's a bottom to our dollars that we can spend on rural taxes. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with which position you're speaking.
It was just in the paper. I was trying to.
Okay.
So any of these new positions that are being created, they are approved by a board of directors of 20 by a majority vote.
Yeah.
So, and what happens is you have a department, just for example, like, this, property assessment or, not the assessment,
Asset management?
asset management. Our managers don't have the expertise to basically do that, so you have to hire somebody with the expertise to do that. And that's where the wages are paid out, and that's included in your taxes.
See, some of us have to have 2 or 3 different jobs to pay for this taxes and other bills that keep increasing. So maybe there's a way that you can have somebody have 2 or 3 different job descriptions in your RDCK also. Don't you agree?
Well, we have an HR department that looks at that, and like you have mentioned, there is gonna be an organizational review done. How efficiently we're operating, our services, what are we providing, and, we'll see what happens. I can't guess what the results will be, whether it'll be an increase in employees or whether it'll be a decrease.
You've been increasing employees steadily. So don't say that there'll be a decrease. There's never a decrease.
Well, this year is, well, I've only been here 3 years, is the first year there's a net decrease in positions. We're taking 2 building positions out and we're adding one asset management. And I think last year, we limited increasing, I think there's 1 parks position. We don't have last year's presentation. Again, you add parks, we add things that requires on an ongoing basis more cost to manage. So I think last year there was a parks position and then a purchasing agent position. Well, no, that wasn't a new position. So there was only 1 or 2 new positions added last year. But I think in fairness to the directors, if you listen into the discussions at the board table, there's lots of discussion about, potential opportunities and how do we look at reducing taxes. There's questioning about existing services, whether, where are some opportunities to cut back on services, reduce services, maybe even pull out of services. So that I think the directors are getting the message very loud and clear from residents that something needs to be done. And I think, as Walter mentioned, part of this organizational review is will be done by an external third party. So I'm sure there'll be some recommendations out of that, and then directors and through the board process, are doing the work they need to do to see where there's opportunities to maybe scale some of those services back.
Thank you. Had a question.
Yeah,
There's a question in the back there.
okay,
We'll answer the question online, then we'll get you.
specialized skills need to be paid at market value. I support arts keeping market value for qualified employees who can actually make change. My 2 cents. Those are comments.
Okay, so, but check.
My question is simple. I just wondered, where does you're not getting Elon Musk in his department of government efficiency, but who is going to be hired to look at?
So it'll go out on a procurement process, like we have to do a public, it's called an RFP, request for proposals. So the directors will be involved in helping that lay out some of that RFP. So it goes out to the BC bid, and then any number of external consultants can bid on that project.
I guess that's how to be accepted.
Yeah, there's no other way to do it. That's how we're required to do it.
When it comes to increased budgets and increased spending, what blew me away, even years ago already, that fire departments were running, so with volunteer firefighters, volunteer fire chiefs, volunteer deputy chiefs and captains. And there was a coordinator that was sitting at the regional district, if you needed certain materials, you need an SCBA or fire truck, whatever it is, right? There was somebody in the regional district that was dealing with this. And then all of a sudden, we go and they have a regional fire chief, and it cost like quite a bit of money. And you could look at this and go like, so that regional fire chief always also needed a deputy, also for over $100,000, I'm blown away, right? And then, on top of it came, that all the volunteer firefighters are not volunteer anymore, but they are, but they will only get paid now. I think it's like $16 an hour by now. I'm for how many years now? I'm 5 years now away from the fire department. I used to be with 28 years in the fire department in Windsor. And yes, I was for 9 years deputy chief, 1 year fire chief. How much do I get? Not a penny. So when that came out, of course, hi, can I get maybe 9 years back pay? But that's a huge chunk of money that goes out for people that, how did the fire departments ever get along without the regional fire chief, with a deputy chief, paying the firefighters, and of course they put more and more, duties onto volunteer firefighters, which I object to too, All of a sudden you need to have this ticket and that ticket and this ticket, and that really boosted up the price, of course, and so for, like you said, 45% to the fire department. Why there it is.
Well, and that's a good example that you brought up, is for Area H with the 4 fire halls that we have. There was myself and a community manager that looked after it.
Yeah, good time.
And, the stipends, whatever, for the fire chiefs were small. The volunteers were volunteers, they didn't get paid. And now it just, it started off at around $350,000 for 4 fire halls. Now it's $1.5 million.
Amazing, wow.
And what happened was there were complaints that the community services manager and the local director weren't doing a good enough job. We have to hire a regional fire chief. Then a regional fire chief, I have to hire a deputy chief. And a deputy chief, I have to hire an administrative assistant, and it kept on ballooning. And it just got out of hand.
And what did we get? And I think, so when I was fire chief, there was a budget of $38,000 or so, right? And that was a bit tight in the whole thing, but it worked. One could operate, fire department.
Yeah. And they ran and did the job, but the basic fire department was started for putting out house fires. That was it. Now we've got road rescue, we've got the first responders, and we've got river rescue, and all of those other services came in, and they didn't come in because the director wanted them or the regional district wanted them. It's the people that wanted them.
We started this, with the Windsor Highway Accident Management Society that I used to be director of, so like many moons ago, and we purchased the Jaws of Life that were put into our Ghostbuster, which was a station wagon, have totally overloaded. You always had the feeling when you drove that car, your back end is passing, and then of course that whole thing was already illegal, right? And then of course repair work needed to be done, more equipment was needed, and so we were actually asking the regional district to take over, right? And that was done, which is actually perfect, right? And now you get a budget for the rescue truck, for the Jaws of Life. If you need materials, if you need equipment, and
and Wolfgang knows all about it because he was part of the Winlow Fire Department.
For 28 years.
Probably. What? Right from the beginning.
No, 92.
Oh, there you go.
And the fire all opened up in 87.
Thank you, okay?
What's that?
Yes, Maggie, go ahead.
Okay, he's on the fire. How is it?
Thank you for coming.
That fire chiefs now, if somebody retires that and they hire a fire chief, that they get paid like $50,000 to $70,000 a year.
Not within Area H. The fire chief does not get that much. I think they're around the $20,000. But you've got 4 of them.
Yeah.
And then the volunteers get paid, and they get paid on call outs and stuff like that. And then they get paid for spending hours training, whatever. And the volunteers are volunteers.
Yeah.
And now they've got to go in there. They've got daytime jobs.
Yeah.
And then they get called out in the middle of the night, and they miss a day of work.
Tell me about it,
So
yeah.
do you not pay them?
Yeah, and then I guess to be also fair is the regulations surrounding fire departments, fire halls is gone up by I don't know, a factor of 10 from 30 years ago. So the onus on training and the responsibility and accountability is before what wasn't there. It's sort of in that volunteer model I've noticed in other organizations I've been involved in, it's changed. There's a lot of community event services like I don't the cross country skiing organizations used to be all volunteer run. Now they have to pay everybody because nobody wants to go as much as years by wants to volunteer their time to do all those tasks.
Yeah, that's where community is not being anymore.
No, it's changing for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, and we're gonna cut it off there. So thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate your attendance and your questions, and thank you everyone online as well. I'll be concluding the meeting now.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah.